men down, bullies, blow the men down.
To me waiting, blow the men down.
Blow the men down, bullies.
I just completed tack welding the base for the boat stand. You notice that I put some wood cleats all around, and that was just to help hold it in position so it didn't move while I was doing the tacking. This is kind of an old school way of doing it, welding on a wooden bench using some wood cleats, but it's what I have. I don't have a steel welding bench, and I don't have any fancy clamps or anything. So I'm just making do with what I have. It worked. The boat stand is now tacked, and I can start finish welding it. And that's not going to take too much. It's going to be pretty much what you just witnessed, except that I'm running the beads a little bit longer, completing the seams on both sides and on the ends. And once that's done, I can just chip it and wire brush it, and on to the next phase. I'm now at the point where I can go ahead and I can tack and weld the tripod into place on the base. Now the base welds may not look very pretty because I'm a little out of practice, but I did make good solid welds, good penetration. I do know that from experience. Also, it's pretty difficult to get good welds when you're welding on old rusty metal. I've cleaned it up as best I can, but it's still hard to get a good clean weld on any of that. But you can get good penetration. You can get a good solid weld that'll work for the purposes that you intend it for. And I think I've achieved that. At any rate, I do have confidence in it. I'm not worried about it. And you'll also notice that people grind their welds afterwards, make them nice and flush. I don't really need to do that on this project. It's not necessary. It's just a lot of extra time and work. When this is finished, you know, you'll see this in the video being completed, but now I have 3 or 4 more to make after this, and I'm rapidly losing weather. Between the last video I posted, part 1, and now we've had a lot of days of rainy weather, and the past 3 days was solid rain, so I can only get out here and do this when it's dry, and well, I'm against the clock, so I'm not going to worry about grinding those welds. For those that are interested, they want to know what I'm using for welding rod. I'm using 2 different thicknesses of rod. They're both 60-13 rods, and one is 3/32, which is what I'm using for tacking. And then my finish welds and filler rod is 1/8 inch 60-13. So my boat stand, the basic stand or base, is complete. And I've put the Acme thread rod into place. I need some sticking up because I have to make the piece that where the pad mounts to. I had a scrap piece of plywood here to use for a pad. So now it's a matter of making the bracket. I didn't have any of this tubing sticking around the shop here, so I went local steel supplier, and that fits just right. I have to cut off a piece and then weld the bracket onto this. About 3 inches. I'm also cutting off 2 sections of angle iron. This was left over for when I cut up the larger size boat stand. I had some extra angle as a result. I didn't need it all when I shortened this stand. So I'm going to reuse this, even though it's still rusty metal, but all it's going to do is it's going to provide support. It'll provide support for the pad, and by drilling a hole through it, have one on each side, it'll be the pivot point where it'll mount on the bracket that I'm making. So I just need 2 of these, 8 inches long. What I need now is a piece of 2 inch by 2 inch channel, but I don't have any channel. I do have some angle steel, which is 2 inches by 2 inches, and needs to be 2 inches long. That short piece will go on the top here and be welded to that tube, and with a hole drilled through it, and that'll make part of that hinge. But since I only have angle, but I do have some flat bar, which is the same thickness as this angle, and I can just, it is 2 inches wide, so I can just cut off a small piece and I can weld it to this angle, making a channel effectively. So here's the plywood pad that the boat sits on, and this is the underside, and these angles will be spaced apart like this, and this channel will be welded to this tube. And it's upside down now, but it'll look something like that. Okay, now this will go in here between these channels. These channels will be bonded with some screws to the plywood pad. There'll be one bolt going through the channel, we'll go through all the channels, which acts as a pivot bolt. That way this pad can tilt either way. But having these corners stick out, even though it's on the underside, somebody might catch themselves on it. So what I want to do is I just want to zap off these corners. So I'll just take my cut-off tool, knocking off those sharp corners so that nobody will catch themselves. And that's the next step. Now I'll just clean up the sharp edges with the grinder. I'll just do that real quick off camera. So I kept drilling off camera. I was going to separate these because it would be easier to drill through thinner metal if I did one at a time after I had the pilot hole. But these were secured to the point where this just wasn't moving, and I was able to drill easily through it all the way up to 3/8. I planned on using 1/2 inch. Right now I only have some 3/8 inch bolts. I have to go get some 1/2 inch ones. I can always bore these out to the 1/2 inch size later. But for now, just to mock it up and see how it works, I'll just leave it at 3/8. And now I have to do a pilot hole on this one side before I weld it up. Because once this is, I don't know where I need to drill the hole until I have this welded. So if I drill a pilot hole and then I run the drill straight through and I do it in a drill press or something so I know I'm straight across, then I'll have a more accurate location for the hole right here. So I'm going to weld, I'll do a pilot hole and then I'll just weld this up. I'm also going to have to, in order for this to pivot, I'm going to have to nip these corners off. Otherwise they'll get in the way of this angle. Now what I plan to do is through bolting with flathead machine screws, countersunk, into the pad, and tapping these holes to whatever thread of the screws I end up using. I don't have any right now. I have to go down to the hardware store and get them. So temporarily, what I'm going to do, just to mark it up so we can call this project good as far as the video goes, is I'll drill some holes smaller than I would be using for when I put the through machine screws in, you know, so I don't have to worry about tapping them or anything, and just run a couple of little wood screws from the back side just to hold it in place. Well, not the prettiest weld, but I did get good penetration. Not too bad for a 50-year-old buzz box. I think I'll go over it a little bit more though, make a couple of finish passes, but I'll do that off camera. You get the idea. This is the part I had to make, and that fits right on top, and this can swivel, and then those angle pieces, which the plywood pad will be mounted to, they can pivot like this. And this can swing. And of course, this will run the Acme screw up and down. That's all there is to that. No big deal. So now what I have to do is I have to extend the pilot hole through to the other side, so I have a hole that's, you know, right in line, and enlarge it to the same sizes on these angles. And I just have to find a bolt to throw through there for now and mount that pad. And that's all there is to making these stands. Now I could have started from scratch, and if I did, and I used brand new metal, we could do a nicer job of it, make it a little bit slicker. But you know, you use what you have, get by with what you have, and get the job done. So I'm going to have to make another 4 or 5 of these things, I guess. So maybe 3 or 4, I don't know. We'll see how it goes. I'm not going to bother to paint them. They're already pretty rusty and everything, and this will just serve the purpose. It'll do what I need it to do. So this is the pivoting mechanism that's going to fit on the wood pad and then goes on top of the boat stand. I'll just get the pad here just to show you. You can see, as I mentioned before, because I have square corners on the top, see how it can only pivot so far? And that's why I have to cut these corners off so that I'll be able to pivot back and forth. So that's the next job. I just have to trim off those little ears. I should be good to go. So I zapped off these little corners and rounded them a little bit, touched them up with the grinder so I didn't have any sharp edges. And this is just temporary. I don't have the right type or size bolt to put in here, but just to see how this works. Now you can see that it can pivot back and forth. And we'll see how it looks on the stand. So once you have this made up, it just slides on there, that's all. And of course, once I have the right bolt and I tighten this up a little bit, it won't just flop. You can tighten it up, give it a little bit of resistance. That's all there is to it.
Sailor, what shall we do with the drunken sailor? What shall we do with the drunken sailor?